You should see a slide now that says computers for beginners. And we're going to talk about technology, vocabulary, and ways you can learn more. We have a lot of guide-led replays and live classes that are on GetSetUp. There's lots of resources that you can learn about technology, but a lot of it is like, what's really going on? You know, this thing is a computer, and what we're going to try and figure out what it does, how it works, what some of these other things are, like networks and the cloud and things like that. We'll talk about a lot of these terms. And if you've got a term you've heard and you're wondering what in the world does it mean when somebody says, oh, do that, and you're saying, well, okay, I know to do it, but what does it really mean? It's like when somebody says, well, if you want to make your car go, you push your foot down on the gas pedal. Remember when you learned to drive, for those of you that learned to drive, and you had to turn the steering wheel and you had to put the brake on. We didn't know how to do that, but there weren't a lot of different controls. With computers, there's so many things they can do that it makes it complicated sometimes, because we may just want to do one thing. Kind of like having a kitchen, where if you have a chef's kitchen with, you know, tons of stoves and sinks and multiple sinks and islands and you know, hundreds of pots and pans and you know, utensils and things like that, you could make a 15-course meal, but maybe you just want to make a sandwich, right? You know, and so where is the knife, and you know, where's the peanut butter, where's, you know, depending on if you like peanut butter sandwiches, which I do. But that's the thing about computers, they can do so much, but sometimes all we want to do is make a sandwich. Okay, and so we're going to learn a little bit more about what it is. Now, I've explained hundreds of technical terms to people over teaching them about technology, and the English language is really pretty good because it lets us make up new words pretty easily. We can combine consonants and vowels and sounds, and we can come up with a new word all the time. So we come up with a lot of things that describe, but as soon as we, as human beings, have invented something, because human beings invent things, you know, I mean, we invented the wheel, and we started fire and things like that. We had to come up with names for those things, right? So we're always coming up with new names all the time, and technology is a human invention. And so all these inventions just really require new words all the time, and it's not going to stop. It's going to, as technology gets more advanced and improves, and usually the people that make up the invention create the name, but sometimes a name becomes popular because it became more widely used by people. Okay, and so we're going to have all these words. There's just thousands and thousands of technology words because we invent a lot of things. You know, we didn't used to have something called an airplane, you know, but now we have an airplane, but you know what an airplane is because you recognize it, right? So a couple of basic terms. There's things that are called hardware. Hardware is something you can physically hold in your hand, okay? Like I can hold a smartphone in my hand. It's a piece of hardware. I can hold a cable. My cable won't reach, but I can hold, if you can hold it in your hand and touch it physically, it's a piece of hardware. So things like computers and smartphones and tablets and smart devices and printers, they're all things you can get your hands on and touch. That's called hardware, okay? And hardware is manufactured in some factory somewhere, and it's shipped, and we buy it and we unpack it and we open it up, and it's a, you know, a piece of metal or glass or silicone or copper or gold, whatever. It's hardware, it's a physical item, okay? And that's what we typically think of as the stuff we use, but the hardware by itself is really pretty dumb. It's kind of like, putting somebody that only knows how to make a sandwich in a chef's kitchen, and they're not going to know how to do anything else. I don't know if you've ever, rented a car and you've gone to the car rental and you find it's a different model than what you're used to driving and the controls are different. You may just want to turn on the radio or start the engine or turn on the air conditioning. But if you aren't familiar with where the controls are, you might not be able to do it. But the car might do a lot more than what you know about. It's just that all you need to do is some basic things, but it's capable of doing a lot more. So hardware doesn't do much by itself. It takes a person lots of times to make it do something, or it takes a set of instructions that help it do something too. We're going to talk about what those instructions are. So I pulled in some slides from my how to buy a personal computer class, because lots of times we're wondering what's inside this box called a computer. Okay. And what is a computer in the first place? Well, computers have been around a long time. Excuse me. It's a machine that follows instructions. Okay. People follow instructions, but we're people. Animals, depending on the animal, follows instructions. Dogs tend to be a little better than cats. I don't know if you've ever tried to convince a cat to do something, but they don't like to follow instructions, but dogs tend to like to follow instructions. And so this is just a piece of hardware that follows instructions. Okay. If it doesn't do anything more than just sitting there, it's just a paperweight, right? It's just a paperweight if it doesn't do much more. But inside this piece of hardware, there's a calculator, and it has a place to store information, or called data, and it can use this thing called software that gives it the instructions to follow. So this is a picture of a processing chip, a CPU, Central Processing Unit. They're little tiny, circuits that are made in very expensive factories. You've heard about the chip shortage. Well, this is what they're talking about, chip shortages, particularly automotive chips, because they're made specifically for cars. Okay, so when you hear a chip, and this thing does the calculating. Okay, you've got two types of memory. One type of memory is called RAM, and it stores information when the computer is powered on, and so that the processor can move information from RAM, calculate, move it back to RAM, calculate, move it back to RAM. And when you're running a computer, like we're running Zoom right now, Zoom is running a set of instructions on our computer that is running, that is sitting in memory. It takes up space in memory, and the processor is doing the calculating. Now, there's also a longer term type of storage, which is commonly called a disk drive. And there is a type of disk drive that has a magnetic platter that rotates around. And there's a type of storage drive, disk drive, that has chips, similar to the RAM, but not quite exactly the same way. When you turn the power off, let me draw a little power switch right here, and you turn it off, the RAM doesn't keep any information. But this type of storage device, which is called a solid state drive, will store information whether it's powered on or powered off, just like the old style rotating disk. Most new computers are shipping with this thing called a solid state drive. Now, chances are you have a smartphone, okay? And if you tap your smartphone, it wakes up right away. One of the reasons it can do that is because it has a processor, but it doesn't have anything called RAM. All it has is solid state memory in it, and it works really, really fast so that it's able to stay on all the time, because this rotating disc uses up a lot of power. So that's why in the old original iPods, they actually had disk drives like this. But as the cost of these solid state storage devices came down and solid state memory came down in price, we were able to put it in more and more and more and more hardware. And the more data you have, the more applications you have, the more storage you need. Okay. And there's some other hardware, things like your screen is a piece of hardware. Your keyboard is a piece of hardware. Your mouse or your trackpad is a piece of hardware. Your computer probably has a microphone and speakers in it, and you probably have a printer. Okay. Things that attach to your computer are typically called peripherals, and because it's peripheral to the, let me see if I can spell this. Peripheral, right? Peripheral is just another word for something that's attached to a computer. And our computers have connectors that usually allow us to connect things to them. Okay, so that's any questions about this hardware stuff? Okay. Now, it's really dumb. I mean, the hardware is really dumb. It doesn't know anything. It can't do anything. It's not the hardware that makes a computer really smart. It's the software that makes it smart. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, I'm going to just kind of review. We've got every computer has a CPU that does the calculating. It's the thinking part of the computer. It adds, subtracts, multiplies, divides, does all those things. There is usually some kind of RAM memory, quick access, that makes it faster for the computer CPU to get the information. And then there's some long-term storage, like your file cabinet, where you might have things in your file. So if you think of your desktop that you use on a regular basis, you probably have, you're the CPU, you're the thinking part of your daily life. And you probably have some things that you want to get to quickly, like a pen or a piece of paper, or maybe a cup of water, right? And so those are things that you want to get to quickly. And of course, you keep them close by. But then you've got stuff that you want to keep, like maybe photos or files like tax returns, things like that. You don't need them every day, but you want to know that you can get to them. So you keep them in storage. And so computers, in that way, they're a lot like people in that they think, but they can't think on their own. They need instructions to do it. Now, you've probably heard some terms thrown around in the world called gigahertz and cores and things like that. As the people that make CPUs have gotten smarter and more experienced, they make them in these expensive factories, that cost billions of dollars to make. And so the faster the CPU can calculate, the faster your computer will work. Okay, kind of like, if you have a bigger engine in a car, it'll go up a hill faster. The faster the CPU, and it's measured in speed called gigahertz, which is how many millions of times a second it can do a calculation. They're really fast, and they get faster and faster and faster. And in addition, on that little piece of chip that comes inside your computer or your smartphone, they can actually put more than one CPU on a single chip. So that, let me change my color here, draw with, so that on one single piece of chip that's manufactured, it could have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 processors that can all do calculating at the same time. So it's like having a computer with 4 computers inside of it when it says it is a 4-core computer, or a dual core is 2 cores, or 1 core is 1 CPU. And as you can probably guess, the more CPUs you have in your computer, the faster it can calculate. Okay, so the speed in gigahertz and the number of cores are what are making our computer chips so fast. We really have pretty fast computers. If you buy anything these days, it's really, really fast. Okay, and so most of the time it'll do almost everything you need. Now I mentioned RAM. It has a storage capacity. Information is stored in what's called a byte, which is actually a set of digits called a bit. And let me go back here a second. And I'm going to draw some things here. Okay, so a bit is a 0 or a 1. Okay, that's how digital technology stores information. It either knows things are zeros or they're ones. That's where the term digits kind of came about. Now, if you put 2 digits together, like 0, 0, you have a combination. If you could have a 0 and a 1, you could have 1 and a 0, and you could have 1 and 1. So as you have different combinations of digits together, you can represent information in kind of like a code, right? So a byte is 8 spaces of information. So if you have a byte, there's 4, 8, okay? And I can make these either zeros or ones, and I can have a lot of different combinations because I have 8 places. And a gigabyte is 1,000,000 of these, okay? And so everything in computers gets down to zeros and ones, but we're using so many of them now that we have a lot of information. And so we store information in megabytes, gigabytes, and just a lot of space. Now, most household computers typically have about 8 gigabytes of information, and that is enough information to really run really well. Now, that's RAM. You're only going to be using the RAM whenever you are powered on with your computer. The solid state drive, sorry about that, solid state drive or hard drive can store a lot more information. This is storing your applications, the things that do the work for you, your data, the files that you create, the photos that you create, that's stored on the storage device, the solid state drive. And it holds everything when you're powered off. And it doesn't matter whether it's oftentimes it's called flash memory in a phone or a tablet, but it's essentially the same as solid state is what it is. It's a chip that stores information even when there's no power. RAM is a type of memory that stores information when you have power supplied to it. And CPUs have a little bit of memory in them as well. But the memory in CPUs is the most expensive to make. RAM is less expensive, and storage devices like these are the least expensive. And so computer companies kind of balance, well, how much memory could I put in my CPU before the price goes up too high and it's not worth it? And then I'll use RAM and then I'll use a solid state drive or hard drive for longer term storage. Now, when you turn on your computer, when you power it on and actually press the power button and power it on, there's a little circuit that goes out to the disk, the storage drive, and says, hey, Bob wants to turn on his computer, get the operating system and put it into RAM so I can load up Windows or Mac or Android or iOS or whatever I'm running. And as long as you have your computer powered on, it'll stay that way. Okay, so, and then your computer is able to run. When you power it off, information gets stored back on the storage drives. Now, phones and tablets tend not to be powered on or off that much. They don't have to be because they have solid state memory. That's the only memory they have. And so they can just go into a sleep mode where the screen goes blank and they use less power, but technically they are powered on and they just have to be woken up. And so their mobile technology is pretty much what we've been using more and more these days. And there's two major types of mobile technology. There's stuff made by Apple, and there's stuff that runs the Android operating system, which is made by Google. So if you buy an Apple phone or an Apple tablet, you will get software provided by Apple, and you can install additional software from what they call app stores. Your phone typically will have some cellular service, which means we're connected to the internet really, really a lot of the time. You have to go pretty far away in the mountains and the hills to lose your cell connection, but you might have lost a cell connection at some point. But when you're connected to your cellular network, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, you're connected to the internet. Computers on our desks are connected typically to our home networks, which are connected on Wi-Fi. And when we have our smartphone or tablet in our homes, we're connected in our home networks as well. But I just wanted to point out that mobile technology is a little bit different than desktops or notebooks or laptops because it's designed to be held in a hand or be portable because of that. But it's still a computer. Okay, you don't have a physical keyboard, but a keyboard shows up when you need to type something. You don't have you have a display that kind of functions as a multi-purpose feature, but phones have microphones and they have speakers and they have ways to play videos just like computers do. So they're really a computer just in a different size and shape. Okay. Your microwave oven is pretty much a computer, and it does one thing. It heats up food with microwaves, but it has a computer that controls it. When you press the number 1 for quick, heat up, there's a little CPU in there that's going through and saying, oh, the operator wants me to heat things up for 1 minute. And it's following some very specific instructions. So wherever you have computers, they are following instructions, and they are all the same, but some might just be dedicated to a single function. An ATM machine is a computer. It has a chip in it, it has a processor, it has memory. It's able to communicate with your bank network, and it's able to do some very specific things. It's able to read a ATM card. It's able to dispense cash and take deposits. So it's a computer. So we have computers all around us in our lives. I don't know if you've ever done a self-checkout register at a store, these days. The reason is that they've got a computer in that register that has a scanner that can scan the UPC, the barcode, and you use a screen to give it instructions on what you want it to do when you're ready to check out, how many bags you want to buy, and then put your credit card in and pay and walk out the store. But it's a computer. So we have computers all around us these days, everywhere, and it's changing our lives because they're pretty much everywhere doing so many things for us, because they are a tool that helps us do things. Okay, so people like to make tools, and technology is a tool. Now, the best part about computers is that they can follow instructions. And the type of instructions they follow are called software. Okay, software is what gives instructions to a computer. You can buy a piece of you can buy a CPU by itself, and it's not going to do anything for you. You have to give it software. You have to program it in doing something. So there's two types of software in general. One type of software is called the operating system, and the other type of software is called applications, or apps for short. The operating systems come with the hardware. They make the hardware functional into a computer. Things like Windows is an operating system. Mac OS is an operating system. Android is an operating system. Google Chromebook is an operating system. And that's what gives the computer a little bit of life and says, okay, there are some basic functions that the operating system is going to tell the computer what to do. How to understand when you press the J key on the keyboard to make a J show up on the screen is something the operating system usually does. How to decide whether something should show up on full screen or part of a screen. How to decide something should go to a printer. How to communicate with the internet are all things the operating system takes care of. So it's like having a housekeeper that just maintains everything and keeps everything, all the dishes washed, the refrigerator organized, the bed letting and linen changed. It's like being able to walk into a fresh hotel room whenever you leave and come back for the day, and it's all made up for you. The operating system takes care of a lot of things on the computer. The applications are what we use to do things with our computers. So email is an application. Web browsing, your web browser is an application. Your finance, maybe you use a spreadsheet. Maybe you use a word processor. Those are applications. Some operating systems include applications that are supplied by the company that made the operating system. So Windows includes a web browser. Macs do, Android does, iPhones do, because browsing the web is such a common day-to-day activity for why people buy computers that they give you one that's right out of the box. Okay, it's kind of like if you had a box of nails and you had some wood and you wanted to get the nail into the wood, you would probably go out and buy something called a hammer, right? And the hammer is the tool you use to hit the nail. Okay, so the application is the tool you use to accomplish something with your computer. And that's so what applications are really what make it computers useful for people. And there are just thousands and thousands of applications that can do all kinds of things. Most people typically, they might have a chef's kitchen because that computer could be really powerful, and they might just make a sandwich or boil water, right? That's okay. You can do that in any kitchen. You can, as long as you have a pot and water and a stove to heat things up on, You can boil water. You could do a lot more, but maybe all you need to do is boil water. You may want to make some tea or something like that. But so some applications are really simple. Some are very sophisticated. Okay, it just depends on what you want to do. But computers are capable of running many, many, many different types of applications. But the applications are why we buy them. You know, I mean, if you wanted just a great expensive paperweight, you could buy an Android or an iPhone and just sit it on your desk all day long, and it would hold things down pretty well as a paperweight. But that's not why we buy it. We buy it because we want to be able to get email, use Facebook, browse the web, find out what the weather is, get directions. It's the applications that we use. You are not a programmer, but programmers basically write in a language that is understood by computer operating systems. And this is an example of a piece of software that basically will tell Google Maps where to put a dot on a Google map. And so you don't have to understand programming, but all you have to understand is how to use the map, because the programmer, people and the person that designed the software makes it possible for you to just tap your phone or click on something and something else happens. When you click on something or tap on something or type in something, a program is waiting to do work for you. You are giving your computer instructions on what you want it to do. So maps are software, word processors are software, email is software, and you are just giving it instructions on what you want it to do. And it's telling the hardware what to do for you, which is kind of nice. It makes it possible. We don't have to understand how the hardware works. We just have to understand how to use something like Gmail or Microsoft Word or Apple Safari or something like that. So a lot of this stuff is dealing with what's called data. Okay, the email application makes it possible for you to send and receive emails, but the data, the text that's in the email is called data. It's electronic information. I don't know when the last time you put a stamp on an envelope was, but we don't do that as much as we used to. Remember the days when we wanted to pay a bill, we'd get out our checkbook, we'd write the check, we'd put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and put our return address and walk to the mailbox and drop it off. These days we can pay things electronically, and so that electronic version of information is just represented in zeros and ones. It just gets converted to zeros and ones, and it consists of files. Okay, so an email consists of a file. A photo consists of a file. A document you create consists of a file, and it has to be stored somewhere. Now, it's not physical, not a piece of paper, it's electronic. And so it gets stored on these storage devices called hard drives or solid state drives. They store the information. Okay, so information that we create or we use make it possible. And the nice thing about electronic information is that it can be moved on networks over wires and wireless communications. It doesn't need to be physically carried. If you know somebody, if you see your postal carrier, they physically carry mail, and drop it off at your home, right? But electronic email shows up on your computer screen. It is information, so it's not just junk, it's information. Well, there is junk email, but that's another issue. But it's information And it basically is just coming to you electronically, so it can be sent over wires and antennas because it's electronic information. At one point, the human beings did not have something called radio. Okay, and so Marconi is credited with inventing the radio, and he was able to send information wirelessly over a radio, and people didn't have to be physically next to each other. Now, telegrams and telegraphs are also electronic information. Morse code was created so that people could send information around the world, but they had to lay cables in order to move it, right? And so there's still cables. Electronic information still needs cables to move all around the world and from our homes to other places and things like that. But it can go electronically, and it's just gotten faster and faster and faster. So now we can actually do video and communicate with video, which is a lot of information. Okay, but this is just a piece of electronic information. Instead of having a paper letter, it's an electronic document, and it can be sent and received. When you download files, you are downloading electronic data, and all of these files can be interpreted by your computer in an application that can open files. So if you have a photo, your computer uses some kind of application that can open photos. If it's an email, it uses an application that can open up emails. If it's a web page, it uses an application that opens up web pages. So all of this stuff that's moving back and forth all the time has made it possible for us to survive COVID, and also, but be able to communicate around the world almost instantaneously, right? Because these things move, electronic information literally moves at the speed of light. It travels really fast. Now, there's this whole industry. If you own any investments in any companies, you have any kind of retirement plan, you hear about it on the news, you hear about Apple and Google and Microsoft and other companies all over the place, right? And these are big organizations. This is a big industry. A lot of companies and a lot of people rely on technology for everything. We do our banking electronically. We do our mail electronically. We just do so many things electronically now. And if companies might want to have particular ways that tie you to their technology. Okay, so, but in order to make technology work together, like I can send an email from my iPhone to somebody's Windows PC, somebody with an Android phone can send an email to me, and I can get it on my Mac or my Windows computer. So there are some things that exist in the industry called industry standards. Okay. But some common ones you might have heard about are the internet, which uses a wireless standard called Wi-Fi. There are a lot of connectors that use a standard called USB, that stands for Universal Serial Bus. There's data standards around, say, music files that are called MP3 files. And the industry has organizations that get together so that all these companies, communicate with each other and say, let's make it easier for people to connect up to the internet. Let's just have a standard for Wi-Fi and we'll all use that. And everybody says, okay, that sounds good. That'll probably help us get more people using the internet and sell more products, right? And it's kind of like your car. Okay, so if you went to a car dealer and you bought a gasoline powered car, okay, and you saw that it used regular gasoline, you wouldn't worry too much about where you were going to get gas. You'd think about the price, but in terms of could you get gas for that car if it used regular gasoline? Yeah, pretty much, and you could go to a dozen different brand names of gas stations and just drive up to the pump, look for the regular, gasoline and start putting regular gasoline in your car. Okay. Regular gasoline is an industry standard in the automotive industry. So if gas companies, petroleum companies make gasoline that they call regular, and car companies make cars that run on regular gasoline. So you can buy pretty much any car that runs on regular gasoline and use anybody's regular gasoline in it without having to worry about it. So you can take trips all over, wherever, and as long as you can find regular gasoline, you can operate your car. Imagine if you lived in a world where when you bought a car, you had to go to the dealer in order to get the fuel to power that car. And that was the only place you could get it. So if you bought a Ford, you'd have to go to a Ford dealer for fuel. If you bought a Chevy, you'd have to go to a Chevy dealer for fuel. If you bought a Toyota or a Honda or whatever brand, you'd have to go to that dealer. It would make life a lot more difficult. So industries create standards that make it easier for you to buy technology that works across different manufacturers and different makers. Sometimes you have something called a de facto standard where one company dominates the industry, or it's proprietary where it's only, it's owned by one company and they don't make it an industry standard. A proprietary standard that exists for anybody that owns an Apple product, that little lightning connector that you use to charge it, that lightning connector is owned by Apple, and they license it to other people, but they own the standard for that lightning connector. So there's some examples of things like that. And everybody has standards both for hardware and software that they have. Okay, when you start using this thing called the internet and you're using a service, you do things that involve logging in and you use a username and a password. This is essentially your key to information or a service. Okay, so if you have a safe deposit box, you have a key that you have, and then the bank where you have the safe deposit box has a master key. Okay, and you have to have both keys in order to open up the safe deposit box. Usernames and passwords work like that. You have a username and a password, and you have to have both together in order to access an online account. GetSetUp has accounts, Zoom has accounts, email services have accounts, and your username is often your email. Usually it is, not always, but usually. And your password is the unique wording combination of numbers and letters you use to make sure that it's only you. So websites, shopping carts, services, other things, they use usernames and passwords to make sure it's you going into the service electronically from a web browser or other tool that you use. And there's a class we do on password lockers that if you're interested in learning more about password lockers, I'd recommend that. But the key is to have a really, really what's called a strong password. And that usually means it's 8 characters, combination of letters and numbers combination, and maybe includes a symbol like an exclamation point or an @ sign, so that it's hard for somebody to guess. And that's your security. Okay, that's like your key, your house key. If somebody got your house key, they could walk up to your door, unlock the front door, get in, and browse anything. Your username and password, your password is like the household key to any online accounts you have and use. We talked a little bit about Wi-Fi and networks. Networks are the connections that enable us to move information and communicate between computers. Okay, so there are several different types of common networks we use. There are many out there, but we use cables sometimes. We use Ethernet. We use Wi-Fi, which is wireless internet. We might use Bluetooth. Bluetooth is a type of wireless communication that is used for things like hands-free calling in your car. It's a different network. So the key thing to remember about networks is that they have to match. So if you have, I don't know if you remember that game that kids play where you have a round hole and a square hole and a triangular hole. That's a bad triangle. There we go. Okay. And if you have a peg that is this shape, it goes into that hole, right? Networks are the same that way. Wi-Fi connects to Wi-Fi. Bluetooth connects to Bluetooth. Cellular connects to cellular. So as long as you have two sides of the network that have the same antennas, the same software that can understand how to communicate, you can communicate. And that's one reason why smartphones get really expensive, is that they have Wi-Fi antennas, they have Bluetooth antennas, they have cellular antennas, they have GPS chip antennas for global positioning systems and maps. So they have a lot of antennas in them that make it add to the cost. And so they're constantly communicating wirelessly, but you can have a physical cable, like if you have a printer that has a USB cable connected up to your computer, you have a physical cable that's connecting it as well. So you can use both physical and wireless. There's tons and tons of connectors out there. They've gotten simpler over the years, believe it or not. Most of the time you've got a power connector. You know that if you go and buy a coffee maker at a store, chances are when you bring it home, it's going to plug into the wall outlet, right? That's because the power outlet is a standard. And if you go to Europe, you got to have a different adapter. Okay. There are USB connectors, there are Ethernet connectors, there are HDMI connectors. This is used primarily for TV and stereo. Apple, I mentioned, makes the Lightning connector, and sometimes you can connect things without a cable. Wirelessly eliminates the need for a cable. That's what it does. So that sometimes you have to physically connect something, but other times you can connect it wirelessly. So you might have a wireless keyboard or a wireless mouse, or you might have a wired mouse. It's just the way it's connecting is all it's doing. And then we've got the web. Okay, the web has a whole lot of information out there. It exists in facilities called data centers that are actually big buildings that have thousands of computers in them, but we connect to them through our home Wi-Fi connection or through a cellular connection by our cell phone provider, and we get to the internet. Okay, we are on the internet when we browse the web, when we use something like Zoom, when we send and receive email. And we use things like web browsers to view web pages on the internet. Web browsers gives us the ability to look at electronic files that we can pull from other computers into our computer and look at. So instead of having to go to the library and look up a book and find the book and physically touch the book, you can get to electronic information. Okay? And you might download some information, which means you are moving it from the web and copying it onto your computer. Or you might do something called streaming, like with Netflix or Amazon Prime or other streaming services, where they're sending you the information while you're connected to the internet. Downloading means you're physically pulling it down, whereas streaming means it is running while as you are connected to the internet. And the cloud is a term that's used to describe a lot of things that happen on the internet. But it can be storage, it can be an application, it can be almost anything. The cloud is not a specific technical term, it's more of a marketing term that applies to things that are done all over the world. So hopefully this has given you a little better understanding of some of the common technology terminology that we use, and some basics about computers and some of the things they do. Part of it is staying with what you know. The more you can keep your technical life simple, the easier life generally tends to be. Learning new
Excuse me, Bob.
technology takes a little bit of learning.
Bob,
Yeah.
I have sent you a message. Please check it.
Oh, okay. See, I'm not seeing chat here on my my screen. So let me open up chat here for a second. There you go. Okay, sure. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, all right. Bye-bye.